We got, correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but Christopher Horstman here
Yeah,
today.
that's perfect.
Got it. He is a personal trainer working out of San Diego. I don't necessarily know a whole ton about you. I've kind of looked at your website and got a little bit of a sense of what you do, but that's really what we're here to kind of learn about is how you got to the place you are, kind of what you do now with your clients. And then we'll talk about kind of the shared connection we have and you learning from MovMed as well. But how did you get started kind of going into this like lane of a career?
Yeah, basketball. Basketball. First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting about all this stuff with you guys. But yeah, basketball was my first passion. Played at Fairfax High School in Los Angeles. Played junior college. Transferred to San Diego State and played as a walk-on. So I was a little in over my head. I probably belonged in a Division II, but made it to the team at San Diego State and had an incredible time, like practicing against the starters and giving everything I could to make that team better. And and then played a little bit in the ABA, which is kind of a mess, pretty poorly run, but I wanted to keep playing against good competition and got to play a little stint in China as like a tour to try to get a job. Uh, Possibly a blessing that I didn't get a job out there. I didn't really love being out there, but yeah, then came back in at San Diego State. I was studying kinesiology. Was always easy for me to push myself and work out super hard. So that felt like a easy career to get into. Um, and yeah, started doing group fitness when I was still in school, and then started doing personal training. Got my CSCS after I graduated, and kind of had the goal to stick as close to basketball as possible. As I was in the training field longer and around strength and conditioning, other strength and conditioning professionals, and in the team setting, I started to feel like I would rather stick to helping any and everybody as best I could. The higher up you go in sports, the more politics are involved and the more BS you have to deal with. And so I feel lucky to be in a position now where I have these nice fitness facilities in San Diego and have the luxury to be able to train whoever I want. So I have a basketball players, but most of my clientele is general pop, just people from all walks of life. And felt kind of serendipitous that I met Nate. First of all, business names are kind of similar. And with my business, I have a big aspect of like discovering yourself and expressing your most authentic self, you know, as best you can through movement and learning about your body. And so Nate has started to give me a little bit of a blueprint of a way to do that. You know, I've felt very in tune with my own body, but it's a real talent to be able to help guide other people to do that. And I can admit that I don't have the greatest ability to assess other people. And so the methods that I've been exercising and practicing through MovMed have given me a little bit of a roadmap or a blueprint to start to figure that out.
Appreciate you saying that. I'm glad that it's working for you. At the very least, there's some contextual layover. I saw like good progress at the very least when we last saw each other a week ago, and you were able to beat your ankle up the next day again.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, cool, thanks for that help. I'm gonna go test it out.
That's something I've done many times, just throughout my like biomechanics journey of like finding new connections and being super jacked or super jazzed to like go try them out, test out the jets. And I've done it multiple times where I've like sprained an ankle or I tore my Achilles essentially doing that because I was like, I got new ankle range, yes, and then I just did way too much on it. I think that's probably a common theme amongst people who are like kind of exploring this and exploring their bodies and like a degree of detail that's probably more than your average consumer would ever want to. For us, we're a little like obsessive about it, I would imagine, and because of that, because we think that we can push ourselves to the uh, our utmost athletic potential, we're looking forward to doing so, and then we have a hard time like reining ourselves back a little bit. So you weren't necessarily like training while you were playing basketball, but I imagine now with kind of the knowledge that you have, you probably integrate a lot of your like workouts with a basketball like level of athleticism in mind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's still the most, like, if I keep basketball in my mind during my training, that ends up being the most fun sessions. And when sessions are fun, they're the most beneficial. You know, you're not grinding through it and you're enjoying the movement that you're doing. And so when I can imagine trying to make myself the best basketball player in the gym, um, things seem to flow a little better. Uh, and yeah, workouts are just more enjoyable.
I've seen you doing a lot more stuff on the playground at one of your spots. I don't know what you called it, but you called it like a games or something like that. And you got a lot of people involved, and you had a lot of I don't know, adults playing, which was cool to see because it was loaded stuff. There was game type stuff, but it was nice to see how much engagement you had accrued and just talking about it. And then a couple weeks later, sorry, a couple weeks later, having been so big.
Yeah, I was really excited about the turnout because I did that once before, or before COVID. I had that CrossFit Games event, which is kind of a play on the CrossFit Games, which is kind of funny because I've never really been into CrossFit, but I know a lot of people are. So I was like, maybe people would be jacked up about this, you know?
Yeah.
And the first time I did it, it was super heavy, like Olympic lifts. It was like 5 exercises, and I think maybe like 6 people did it. Most people were like, hadn't practiced clean and jerks, you know, and like didn't show up. So this time it was like kind of strength training, kind of obstacle course, and a lot more people came out, and there were some quite unfit people there, which made me super excited to see that at least they felt like they could come do it, and everybody who did it finished. And so that was a lot of fun, very rewarding too.
Bitchin', dude.
Is that your own space that you are running that stuff out of?
So I manage that place. It's inside a apartment complex. So technically it's owned by the property management, which is actually the perfect situation because I don't have to worry about all the overhead stuff. I can just worry about putting on fun events for the residents and making sure everything's good over there.
Goodness.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you obviously like you graduated, I guess, with a kinesiology degree, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's called fitness specialist was like the emphasis.
Gotcha. And did you, yeah, you kind of went through a similar like transition as me, where you probably wanted to work with athletics as a priority, and then decided that it's actually more rewarding and just more realistic to work with general pop. With your like experience, like with the early on training, like where was most of your like education from? Were you mostly using stuff you learned in school, or were you like going to different movement systems and learning from them to kind of give you your baseline of like training competence?
Yeah, it was mostly stuff I learned in school. And I would say I use maybe like 5% of that now. But yeah, very by the book in the beginning. And also I still implemented a lot of stuff that I did, just making stuff up as a kid, not having any training, just like running hills, and just a mixture of things, being in the sand and boxing. So I would really try to implement a lot of different modalities with my clients, but not with much structure, I guess. So workouts were unique, and a lot of variability, sometimes probably too much variability, where maybe some progress wasn't able to be tracked in some ways. But I was able to retain clientele at the beginning because workouts were fun and different. But as I moved down the line in my career, I started to get into WEC method a little bit, stick mobility. I mean, with the help of the internet, I was able to dive into so many different modalities and then use what I like the most. And the other thing with my system now is that and working with Gen Pop clients is that I can implement a little bit more of like positive mindset, as and with athletes, it's like you're so driven by numbers that there's really not a lot of time for anything else other than like, we got to get this and this done in 45 minutes so you can get on to the next thing. And so I really like being able to slow down with clients and talk about their feelings and those kind of things, because that stuff matters.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's predominantly what we do, minus the sometimes languageable stuff. Like, this means this to your body. Hope your brain understands that, even if your ears don't.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had so many light bulbs go off in our sessions, Nate, and like things that you texted me that I like screenshot and look back on later. I'm like, wow, yeah, that is making so many connections for me. And that was the key word that Benjamin, you said earlier, that I was thinking of before we got on this podcast, was like the connections. There's so many different connections from the external world to the internal world, and then internally within yourself from different areas of your body. And like, I feel like that's the biggest thing that MovMed has helped with, is just to start, there's infinite connections, and it's piecing things together that I may have never connected,
Was there like a first one that you can recall, or is one that was early on, you were like, man, I was missing that this whole time?
Maybe more just like a validation of you can be bigger than you are, and like my whole life, especially playing basketball. Maybe if I never played basketball, I never would have felt this way, but playing basketball, I always felt undersized. I grew late, so I got to 6'3", which is still small in basketball circles, but at least I look like a basketball player. But I was always underweight, and not just on the scale, but like I felt like it in games. I was getting moved easily and bouncing off guys, and tried to put on weight in different ways. But I think deep down, I never really believed that I could get bigger. And so I'm like excited right now because Nate has given me confidence that, you should and you could be bigger than you are. And it all starts with that belief, and along with, getting circulation to the right areas. That was another thing, that like these junctures, the shoulders, the neck, and the hips that provide blood flow to the extremities, was something that I was like, oh, why did I never think of that? Like, maybe I'm small in these spaces, therefore I'm small everywhere else,
That's
Yeah,
usually the I hear people picking up on, which is the we're bigger than we are. And I don't even know where I like first mentioned it, but there's I don't know, there are aspects of things that I knew I could not coordinate unless I had more mass in areas, like I had more tissue to speak of.
Mhm.
And I started to see like one especially where you can do it, I can't. It's like palming a basketball, and I'm getting closer and closer the more I get a little bit of like meat behind the pinky. But dude, where this hand, like the gripping there versus the gripping here, it's so different from what I could do versus what I can do now.
Mhm.
And to think that it still requires more tissue for me to be able to stabilize anything bigger than my hand is at present. Not just that, but a number of things I found out after having my own injuries. I had started to like really slack in my posture, and I built out that little postural hump, I forget what it's called, on my cervical spine. And my dad had it, and I was like, oh wow, I'm way too early on this one. I got at least like 25 years for this. And so that was my focus, and I started to really pay attention to what I needed to do to reconstitute my neck a little bit. And with that, dude, with me even just trying to pull my neck back, it was like 3 inches of space that in the last 2 years I've garnered, because I was so slouched forward. I was so posturally restricted from head injury, like like not being able to actively advantage like what's going on around me. So I had to like consciously look at it, and for what I couldn't look at, I had to protect.
Mhm.
Most of us live in those injuries. I imagine you have a number of those injuries, having, like you said, you couldn't put on the weight, but from you still had the athletic wherewithal to like compete in those frameworks. So there's probably something inhibiting where you felt like you could posture up and where you felt like you could really expand into that tissue.
Yeah, yeah, and I like being able to palm a basketball, but definitely my wrists and obviously my ankles from all the ankle injuries uh, are just small, you know, and any small knee or elbow that I would take to my arm or my leg would hit me deeper than it would hit anybody else. I just don't have a lot of meat there, so yeah. And another MovMed technique or idea that was novel to me was being strong from the midline out. Like I have all these force vectors that I'm familiar with, but it never dawned on me to create pressure into the torso from different angles and be able to build the rib cage out. That was something I never thought of in my training, and was like, yeah, like if the core is the center and your midline wants to be stable, yeah, you need to have muscle and strength and size and volume there to support everything else.
Yeah,
That one does.
that was the thing for me that felt like it gave me the capacity to feel bigger. And again, I play basketball as well, and on the court, I felt like I was starting to take up more space. Initially, once I started to do it, my like coordination, my dribbling, my shooting all went to shit because I had to like completely reorient where I was like producing the force from, and everything felt off because I was probably so distally like oriented. And like you mentioned there with like familiar force vectors, like the force vector going by somebody on that first step. It just felt like instead of me thinking about like my hands going there, like leading with my shoulders, it felt like my center of gravity was what I could drive, and I didn't have to drive it so much around. I could drive it through people just because there was more like just more energy or more of a charge behind it.
Yeah, and that's such a huge cue right there for young basketball players. It's like, stop trying to go around people. You got to go by them, attack their hip. But if someone is undersized, like that doesn't help them a lot, you know, unless they're super quick. And even then they can still get bumped off the line so easily. So that's nice.
Do you get to work with a lot of like youth basketball players?
I did for a while. Right after I finished playing, I was coaching a team in Carmel Valley called the San Diego Bulldogs. And I honestly miss it a lot. I love working with youth basketball players, because that playing basketball as a kid shaped me so much, and I had so much fun doing that. And I'm really wanting to carve out some time in my schedule to get back into doing that in some capacity.
So it's oftentimes the coach at that age for a lot of kids that don't have it at home that provides that first positive male role model or some measure of like kids don't really know how to, boys especially don't know how to communicate outside of like a physical and very expressive environment usually at a young age. And so seeing an adult that condones that kind of behavior, or at least teaches you how to like be competent in that framework, at least good for ADD kids and ADHD kids.
Yeah, there's a lot of like a social connection that's much deeper than anything you're going to get in the classroom or in gym class, just because one, you're kind of going to war with these people and you're like preparing, you're putting in a lot of time and effort with a singular task or with like a general goal in mind. And if you don't have sports, maybe you have that through like being in a band, like you're in like grade 11 band and you play the tuba or whatever, and you got to play your role, but it's not nearly as physical of an output, although it still is. There's definitely a lot of value to that. I imagine that there's like artistic outlets for it, but yeah, being on a team or in a team sport environment at a young age, I'm sure did wonders for me. There's still a lot of things that could have been improved about my experience, because I had one of those like coaches who had been at the high school for 50 years and was still using like 1960s education. We got really good at boxing out, really good at right hand layups, but there wasn't there wasn't so much of a emotional support attached to it. There wasn't like the feeling like movement expression attached to it. It was all very much like cut and dry. These are the fundamentals. You got to do these drills. It wasn't nearly as enjoyable as like I would probably be able to make the experience for a kid, kind of knowing what I know and knowing what kind of an environment I would have liked to have had that would have just bolstered more confidence. And Chris, I know that's something you talk about like on your website and stuff, that like you want to be feeling like your authentic self is being like bolstered by what you're doing. It's not being suppressed by what you're doing, right?
Yeah. So with that, I've recognized that in training, when I'm moving and I don't have a structure to my movement, I'm moving, I have an hour or a day where I'm doing whatever I feel like doing, whatever my body feels like doing. During and immediately after that session, I feel so much more expressive. Like there is no reservation to the things that I'm saying, and what I'm saying, I feel deeply. And if I go a period without allowing myself that, I feel more reserved. I feel like I am less opinionated. I feel like I become, which is part of my personality, is like being very agreeable. I'm a peacemaker, you know, I want to get along with everybody. But a lot of times that doesn't serve me. And a lot of times that is a little bit of an inner conflict for me. But I have noticed that if I'm moving my body in certain ways that feel really good, after that, I'm like a little more open, a little less afraid to say how I really feel in certain situations. So that was a big light bulb for me, is like, this is an avenue where I can help discover, you know, my authentic self and express it. And now I want to try and help other people do that.
So that's one of the big mainstays, or at least where MovMed and you align quite heavily. I think one of the big things that men have a tendency to do without being able to like forgive themselves, I guess, is be uncomfortable out loud, because it makes a lot of people inherently uncomfortable, because it's perhaps someone that they look toward for comfort or whatever, someone that's usually very happy, as you say you are. And then demonstrating that other side of things, the side that you don't want to feel. You assume other people will contextualize that feeling in their own respect similarly. I found that because men have a tendency to, I guess, like externalize their emotions or equivocate them to feeling their body and the like, there becomes a misnomer or like a discongruity between, if they stop playing sports, for example, and they no longer have that team camaraderie, there's some distinction of like, who and how do I manage these feelings if I don't have the same words or actions to describe them with. And I think that the biggest thing that we can be bigger than we are, I think the value there is that each of us respectively has a different size frame. Some of us are bigger, some of us are smaller, but respective of how we frame our neurology, it's a lot of things that there's a lot of things that coincide with threatened behavior and being smaller in body. And if you have a tendency to not feel like you have the ability to be safe in an environment, there might be ways in which you'll perceive more environmental security, like tensing tissue, and then walking into an environment with immediately actionable tissue when you didn't necessarily need to be actionable. But because you spent so much time like that, it not only didn't really get the time to really stretch and like build out how big it can be, but it accrued a lot of that stress environment. So a lot of cell waste and the like didn't flush out. Similarly, like the expression letting go, it comes with a lot of physical letting go sometimes, and most often letting go of like toxic relationships, whatever. Those things might come with something physical, feeling like, oh, I've purged something. So in anything that we frame with, we are emotional at the same time as we are thoughtful. So it's so important. It's so important that we can create like an embodied version of that without having to think about it, without having to process it through stimulus, but to have that body tell us by way of sensory feedback, how it speaks to our brain. Hey, this is how we are. This is how we feel. Don't worry about what's going on outside of you. We can manage it. And that's just relative being aware of some things you might have hindered yourself with for a long time, being okay with that, forgiving yourself, and then moving on to, these are the tools I need to use to be able to get over that hurdle.
Yeah, beautifully said. Around the same time we were training, Nate, I have a friend up in San Francisco who an older guy who's into like coaching men, and I would tell him how I was feeling at certain times, and he would always ask me where. He's like, where in your body do you feel this?
Yeah,
And so it was really cool. I mean, for a while I would try to tune in and like, I don't know. But after a couple of weeks, we're like, okay, this one's kind of in my tummy, you know, this one's in my up higher in my chest. This one kind of feels like it's in my throat.
yeah,
And it was cool to see those lining up with what we were doing.
totally. I mean, there's if you look at, I think it's Adidas, they have some shoes that have the insole laid with like all the not chakra points, but it's like the acupoints. And so it shows like the liver, where it places on the foot, and like however commercial it is for Eastern medicine to be practiced right now in the US, it's one of the more prevalent forms of medicine that exists in the world, meaning it happens more actively and more often, and it helps more people than pharmaceutical medicine. And that's happened for like, as far as thousands of years, and for its lifespan, it's been around and done more. And it's like where chiropractic also has a lot of its science based off of, but with less energetics to speak of. My point in that was in everything that we qualify neurologically now, there was a different framework of qualifying it before. And because it was more sensory, or at least they didn't have the technology to be like, this is giving us feedback here, they went off the feedback they could resource off of, what is this doing or whatever. And it was oftentimes sensory stuff. So I imagine the more that we build out our sensory mechanisms, the more that we have the capacity to meditate, the capacity to concentrate and relax, because we are getting distracted by everything. And it's very easy to be distracted by the increasing amount of things that there are available to us. But we all come back to the things that bring us back to ourselves. So it's significant when we can tool ourselves to not have to do an action or an extra 1, 2, 3 to get that, oh, here I am. When your brain can tell the information the body is processing without having to be like looking down at it to like move it, to feel something interacting with it, just for it to know that it's there without having to do extra stuff or without having to pay extra attention, the brain is like verifiably way more satisfied, because it's having interaction with itself without having to exert more energy. And the more that we can become a fuel efficient computer, so to speak, where our processes happen without us having to code them, then we're reflexive, or inherently like going with the flow, if people want to be a little bit more languid about it. But yeah, all this contextualizes around feeling. If we have no awareness of feeling, then we are a byproduct of where we get, if we're stressed, we have no process. We have no ability to be aware. And then otherwise we're awesome.
Yeah, another thing you told me that really clicked was your body's not gonna add a lot of tissue, or any tissue really, if you're stuck in a stress state, because your brain is consuming so much of that energy, you know, keeping you stressed, that why are they gonna, there's none of that to delegate to building out any more tissue. So from stress to strong is mitigating the stress first and allowing your body to rest in that parasympathetic, so other things can flow through it.
Totally. It's instead of feeling like you're in distress, it's orienting around your eustress factors, what your body can tolerate to varying degrees of efficiency or proficiency over time. And as you get better and better and better at like recognizing what your body's doing, like you're looking at the odometer and being like, I appreciate that. And then redlining and be like, I'm not going to do it too much. I'm not going to break you down, but I'm definitely going to play with how far I can take this. That's kind of what you have to do with your body. And then if you find that you have a threshold that's way more susceptible to injury, then you have to prepare around that. And that's, I think most people will avoid doing the thing that seems the hardest, especially in areas that are more injured or more intolerant of growth, because fundamentally they have the least amount of coordination in them.
This episode of the Monkey Bars podcast is sponsored by the MovMed introductory 5 for 5. 5 exercises for 5 minutes each to connect and challenge your neck, shoulders, and hips while making your sitting, standing, and stress tolerance more resilient. Sign up for this free online course over at movmed.net. It's funny that you talk about kind of the spectrum and being able to push it to the red line and just kind of understand like the spectrum of that scale a little bit more. If you're always here, it's not going to feel like redlining. It's going to feel like your normal state. And if you're always here, or you spend most of your time kind of more in that chill, maybe you're still neurologically like here, but you're not getting the physical output to match it, then that also creates like an expression that you're not really utilizing. So I've noticed in just doing a couple weeks of like more standard weightlifting, I'm just going to the machines and just seeing how much load I can put on this one like guided motion where I'm really not trying to coordinate much at all. All I have to do is push the thing. That allows me to kind of like ramp up and to get more to that red line to a degree that I really couldn't when I'm trying to be more like technical or more controlled in my motion, or I'm trying to find a new range of motion. That's like a different kind of output. And generally when I'm trying to find a new range of motion, I don't want to be there. When I'm more so exploring like a range of motion that I have full control over and just seeing what output I can have, I can get to that red line. And I've noticed that in the first like week of doing it, it was really tiring and it was harder to get to the point where I wanted to keep pushing. And now just even after a couple weeks of kind of refinding that end of the spectrum, I'm like, okay, I have a little bit more like intentional focus that I can gear towards this activity, and not even just this activity, but like outside of the gym. I'm like, oh yeah, there's kind of like a boost that this stuff gives you. There's a reason why people feel really good after doing heavy efforts of any sort. It is like a very direct, all of your energy goes towards this one thing, and it has to for a certain amount of time, and you can play with that. It's been really interesting to feel that, and makes me wonder why I completely ditched it for so long. Have you, Chris, like, you obviously did a lot of weightlifting like in your basketball career, I imagine. Did you ever find that you wanted to take a break? Did you drink like the functional Kool-Aid and like back squats bad, deadlifts bad? Did you go through a phase like that? Maybe you're still in that phase, I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I, like most people, want to be successful, right? So I avoided the lifts that I wasn't good at or didn't feel good to me. So back squatting I ditched early on, and I had that co-signed by one of my mentors. He's like, basketball players shouldn't back squat, they got long levers. And so I was like, cool, never gonna do that again, don't have to, right? But recently, before this injury, I found a way to make it feel really good for my body, and not part of the never back squat camp anymore. But that was really the only one that I kind of shunned for a while.
In your like going through either MovMed or going through your own kind of process, have you developed more of an awareness of kind of where your like nervous system is even as you're playing? Like, will you maybe not go to the red line as quickly as you did, or maybe now you're actually on the court a little more parasympathetic than you were before?
I can say that my emotion is much better regulated, possibly because I'm more aware of how my emotion presents itself in me physically. So I've always my emotions have always run high playing basketball. As a kid, I cried after every loss. I was a terrible loser. I would throw fits. I would cry mid-game sometimes if things weren't going my way, and my coach would like take me outside, like pull it together, you know. And then in my adult life, that turned into a lot of shit talking. That was the game within the game for me. How could I piss this dude off? And but really, it was pissing myself off. And I don't really need to play angry to play better. I play better when I'm kind of zenned out. So that was a shift that I recognized, that I could play and still talk a little bit, but have it be friendly, like kind shit talking rather than some disrespectful stuff, you know? And I was playing a lot better too. And before I sprained my ankle, I was feeling like I was in the zone every night. And I think that was largely contributed to just having better awareness of my emotional level, my kind of thermometer in a sense during games.
Interesting to hear how people perceive themselves or language with their brain and body differently, as you call it. How your emotional level, like you're an emotional person or you live in your emotions. I think I'm a little bit on the analytical side, but I find that I still have my emotions as like a heavy force I'm trying to regulate, which is where like being more analytical gives me the safety or security in that. So there'll be times where I'm like, I deficit to being too thoughtful, and thereby don't get enough emotion out of the experience or get enough of that limbic response or that reflexive response, thinking I can think my way through it. Recognizing that you are still very limbic in it. It sounds like a dance to you. It sounds like something that you get to be passionate in, and you don't have to necessarily depend on your brain language for as much.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's true. Like I was at my sister's wedding this past weekend, which was really cool up in Northern California. And I cried like 3 times in the drive home from the wedding. And my girlfriend was in the passenger seat, like, "Are you crying again?" I was like, "Yeah, I don't know why." It was beautiful, wasn't it?
Awesome. Yeah, let it go. Just allowing yourself to feel. A lot of dudes don't have that luxury. At the very least, they've never seen it done, or they've never. I don't think I ever saw my dad cry, and if I did, it was like so. I don't know, like restricted or like closed off, that it wasn't something that you could like classify as like, he's really letting go. He's really letting himself go right now. This is a good cry. Yeah. There's nothing worse than a bad cry, you know?
Right.
Yeah, like this could have been really refreshing. It feels like this is making me want to do it more. Yeah.
Like a ruined orgasm.
Yeah, exactly right. I think the biggest thing for men in general, at least from my perspective, is that coming to terms with that. Like when I've trained a bunch of different dudes, I found that a lot of them, however masculine they are in their habits, they find that they have a difficulty in being able to express themselves in like male terms, because they don't have an environment that either keeps up to that level or degree of intensity, or they've never had like enough dudes around that are of their age that are not that are up to the challenge, I guess. And so in some capacities, men for some respect hold themselves a little bit more small and tense, and it may be like whatever like muscles that guide you to start, we hold on to and cling to first. But I think there's nothing more valuable than dudes becoming aware of and capable of languaging through how they feel and what it is they want to like do with their feeling, instead of just being driven by it. Because there's a time and a place for it, and when you can put it to passion, that's exactly what it needs to be for. And when you can feel your feelings and cry on the drive home, that's exactly what it needs to be for. And it's a shame when we don't get to feel that, and oftentimes it's like mirror stuff, what we've seen, what we've been allowed to process. And for anyone, any of those dudes that don't cry out there, David R. Hawkins, a book called Letting Go, is a great start. I think I recommended it to you as well, didn't I?
Yep, I've read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. Yeah. We need more models out there to let it go and let younger men see it and know that it's okay and not be ashamed of it.
Yeah, we need less repressed dudes, less repressed people in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, dudes seem to be the ones that when they're repressed, they cause a little bit more damage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Before we go, because I want to wrap up pretty soon, Chris, I was interested in just getting your take on, again, on your website. It says that it's very easy to get wrapped up or lost in the sea of health and fitness stuff, and that you think a good trainer really masters the fundamentals as a priority and is able to kind of teach their clients what those are. What are those to you, and what are some things that you find yourself taking most people through, especially in those first couple sessions?
Great question. Yeah, those have changed for me over the course of my career for sure. Like I said, I started off by the books and like we'll go FMS screen, and and those kind of things were the fundamentals initially. But with the help of MovMed, the core, the torso, the trunk, and the midline are the center of it all, and where I start now. So posture, without even having them move too much yet, I'm looking at how they hold themselves, how they're standing. And I try to make my assessments undetectable, like I'm having them do movements that where they're not seeing it as an assessment, right? I'm not, okay, I'm gonna look at you do an overhead squat. No, I try to get them into dynamic movements where I can look at their joint angles and what they're using to accomplish the task, right? And the task could be different every time. So that's a little bit new for me. That's something that I'm starting to do in my training. So I'm also learning in that by seeing more people move through those whatever movements I have them do. But I'm watching for what's leading the movement, right? Are they dominating with the extremities? Are they very heavy into the hands and feet, or are they able to coordinate from the hips or the shoulders or the trunk? And so those are that's where I start now. And also like the isometrics, positional isometrics are something that I didn't use at all when I first started training. I remember one of my best friends asked me when I was still in school, he's like, what are isometrics used for? I'm like, honestly, dude, I don't know. Just a different training stimulus, but they're so useful in helping clients and people understand where tension is, and you can bring your awareness to 100 different areas in one position over the course of a positional isometric. And so those have been super useful as well.
Nice. Do you find most of your clients like take it pretty well? Do you have some that are like kind of more body aware and they pick it up, and then you've got others that are like less body aware and it's more of a stressful experience and maybe you have to like tone it down a little bit for them?
A little bit of both, and a little bit of like, so not tuned in that it's just boring. They're like, why are we doing this? I'm paying you for like to come move, And so it's I do my best to pitch my case, but also they are paying me for the hour, and if they want to move, I'll get them moving faster than I would have wanted to.
Okay, and then lastly, because you brought it up, and I think there's probably an interesting story or two. What was your experience like over in China, and how long were you there for?
Culture shock. I grew up in LA, which is a melting pot of different races, and it never even crossed my mind that I could be somewhere where there was all one race. I mean, that sounds so silly, but I was like, oh, everybody's Chinese, like everybody. The air quality was awful, and like people were smoking cigarettes in the arenas. It's like couldn't get a breath of fresh air anywhere. What was your second question?
I was just wondering how long you were there for.
Oh, for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and we played a couple different teams. We traveled around, and it was a small province in China called Hunan, not Wuhan, but Hunan. And it was fun because the arenas were like packed. People were just stoked to see Americans play, even though we weren't that great. But the games were good. They were close. And I had one really good game where I was like 7 for 8 from 3. I was just bombing. Like as soon as I touched it, it went up. I probably dribbled twice the whole game. It was like Klay Thompson stuff.
Yeah.
And I missed the game winner at the buzzer in overtime. So that hurt, but that was a super fun game.
Tough. The cigarette smoke probably got the best of you.
Yeah.
It's like playing basketball in a casino.
Yeah, that's totally what it was like. our owner was terrible, and he had no like interpersonal skills, relationship skills, and he like pissed off the couple that was hosting us, the Chinese people that were hosting us and like paying for everything. And like he went up to them at one of our breakfasts and like threw money in his lap, and I was like, that doesn't look good. And the guy like started cussing him out in Chinese, and I was like, I think they still have our passports. I'd like to get those back before we start throwing stuff at each other. And then they didn't want to give us any game film because they didn't like our owner. They wouldn't give us any of the film, which, I mean, maybe one or two of us would get a job, but the film was super important to be able to give to other teams to show, you know, our skills. And so I literally went to the coach, like one of the guys' rooms, and was like, I know our owner's an asshole. Like, I'm willing to pay to get the game film for my teammates, you know, and he gave it to me. But yeah, the trip had everything. We went to a karaoke bar, which is really popular out there, and we got duped out there. Like, they gave us a bunch of liquor and sent a bunch of girls in the room, and like nothing happened. They were just hanging out with us, and then they billed us for every girl that was in there, every beer we drank, like a lot of money. And we're like, we don't have this money. They're like, well, you're not leaving till you pay us.
Oh man. It's not very often you get a receipt handed to you with like girls as one of the items.
Yeah. They were like, they put us in a room, and then they're like, wait a second, let's put him in the grand master, like the giant room. We were like, oh sweet, we got upgraded. And then like, oh girls too, sweet, all right. And then when we left, they were like, yep, you owe us for everything.
So dirty.